Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. I'm Urza Master. Joining me as always, Lord Uther and Fert Derby. And it is my great displeasure to introduce the third to last entry in Season 3 of Star Trek, the original series. I don't even remember the name of this one because it was not as much of a hoot as I thought it was going to be, with a picture of Abraham Lincoln as the thumbnail on Paramount Plus. So I'm going to turn it over immediately to Fert Derby to give us a little more information on this entry, shall we say.
Thank you, Ursa Master. Thank you, Lord Uther. Thank you, Warp Core fans. Yes, we are in the final three of the original series. This one aired on March 7th, 1969, and for the record, it's called The Savage Curtain. It was directed by Herschel Daltrey. The story was by Gene Roddenberry, The Great Bird in the Sky. The teleplay was by Gene Roddenberry and Arthur Heinemann. So now let's punish those who are responsible. Herschel Daltrey directed the season 1 finale, as it turns out, Operation Annihilate. We covered that back in Warp Core number 42. It's the one where Spock is attacked by like a jellyfish, in flying jellyfish, and gets stung. If you remember that, and it was yes. What we thought of it, go watch Warp Core 42, and we'll tell you all about Operation Annihilate. This is Gene Roddenberry's first credited story credit since Assignment Earth, which we covered in Warp Core 65. That was the second season finale for the original series, and that's the one with Terry Garr and the mission to NASA and the mysterious guy, good-looking guy who can transport between time and had a swanky New York office. So that's Gene's first story credit. This is his first credited teleplay, or co-teleplay, since Bread and Circuses, which we covered in Warp Core 64. And before that, the Omega Glory, which was Warp Core 62. And you'll remember the Omega Glory was the strange pantheon to the American flag and the Constitution. And so, I don't know. When I see a showrunner and creator's name on a script, I generally get excited because I'm thinking, well, if nobody else is going to know these characters or this show better than the man who dreamt it all up. But we'll get into how Gene's been doing on this one here. The last person responsible is Arthur Heinemann. He wrote a very good Trek, in my opinion, with Wink of an Eye, which we covered in Warp Core 76. But he also wrote one of Ursa Master and Uther's favorites, Space Hippies, in The Way to Eden, and that we covered in Warp Core 85. So he's been very good, and he's been very space hippie. Lee Bergère played Honest Abe Lincoln in this episode. That's not a typo. And Barry Atwater gave us Surak, or Surak, depending on which character was pronouncing it. We also got Genghis Khan, the Klingon Kahless, and a whole host of other baddies, and a rock monster. Gentlemen, I can't even bring myself to say the line that most offended me in this episode. There were a couple. But Honest Abe Lincoln has an encounter with Uhura that is both of the time period and of the Lincoln period, but also just stands out like a sore thumb here in 2024, soon to be 2025 viewership. And it didn't necessarily go uphill from there. I think my biggest concern, and you guys can help me elaborate and elucidate on it, I think Gene loved the idea of interspersing, world history, U.S. history, cultural. I think those are stories that got his engine flowing, whether it's Bread and Circuses, recreating gladiator games for television audiences, or the Omega Glory, having alien races show a fealty to, democracy and so forth. So I can kind of put on the Gene Roddenberry visor and see what he was going for. I think my biggest concern is that it's just impossible to separate the 2024 viewing lens through what was coming through in 1969. And Ursa and Uther, you might be able to best explain this to our viewers and to Trek fans. I think Rick Berman and team, a few decades later, found a novel and creative way to take this type of storytelling and make it more palatable and more digestible and more authentic. And I think this might have even been some workshopping of those ideas, if you will. But it's just impossible to separate, especially if you grew up with the, late 80s, 90s Star Trek, and you're just visiting this now for the first time. I just never bought it, if you will. And I think if this story had been presented even in A Strange New Worlds now in 2024, I think there's a whole different lens and prism you can view this and how to bring these types of characters and scenarios to play that I would have a better time accepting. But I was just rejecting it from the very first opening shots, the little teaser, and you know why. I just kind of shut down as far as I'm going to accept this. I know what he was going for, and thematically, there are some things that are worth mentioning, worth saving, but overall, we're near the end. Jim Morrison is crooning, "This is the end," and Martin Sheen is breaking hotel rooms in Saigon. So, what do you say to the Savage Curtain?
Heavy sigh, to say the least. I think the biggest takeaway is future Treks learned from this episode. I think there was a way to have Lincoln and Uhura have an exchange that commented on racial tensions of the 60s. I think the language used now is definitely a little bit harsher, perhaps, than it was in 1969, for good reason. It's not in our lexicon, and shouldn't be any longer. But it was somewhat poignant, and I get the point they were trying to make. So that honestly was probably the least of my gripes with this episode. I'm not even so upset at the fact that they tried to bring this hodgepodge of historical characters on the sides of good and evil to demonstrate to these beings, not quite Q, not anywhere close to being as interesting as a Q, who are just foreign to the concept of good and evil, which, okay, I can buy it. Like, I could see it. Like, I think there have been other godlike beings that have achieved it. Some sort of an amoral viewpoint that shows us something about humanity and society. Why not Khan? If you had Khan Noonien Singh in this episode instead of just another guy like Khan, but we couldn't afford Ricardo Montalban again, it may have gone off a little bit better. I think you could have maybe wormed Abraham Lincoln in. Certainly the Vulcan, I'm on board. That made sense. That was probably the one thing that made sense. KLS, you gotta have a Klingon, right? It's just, you had to have a Klingon. Okay, why Genghis Khan? Why not, you have a Vulcan, why not a Romulan? You had Romulans in the series already. You could have Mark Lenard back, and have him be, Kirk's foil. But then you'd have Khan, you'd have Mark Lenard, you'd have an amazing cast. You could have made this an amazing episode of all the good guys versus all the bad guys. I mean, you could have even had Trelane or hell, you could have made this a Harry Mudd episode and it would have been better. Instead, we get this awful, I I don't even know. I don't even know. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a bad wrestling match. With they're throwing sticks at each other, like they have bows and arrows, but instead of throwing spears, like really, there's this Vulcan boomerang that never makes an appearance. They never actually use it. Um, I I find myself disgusted, frankly, by the lack of writing acumen. I don't know if Gene Roddenberry took a couple tabs of LSD when he was writing this and had all these great ideas that got translated through some mind-altering substance into, like a T-ski joke or something that you would get. You know, rest in peace, Mitch Hedberg. But this is bad. I mean, it's just I don't know that even I, who defend the worst of Star Trek episodes, I can't stand on this hill. I can't fight for this episode. It was terrible.
Yes. But here's the one thing I like just a little bit. I like that we got a little bit of history, like a little bit of Star Trek history. It was a little bit. I actually didn't mind that part. Yes, the rest of it, and I like how Klingons can suddenly modulate their voices like their Data. Help, Spock. Help. I mean, like, what? Was that supposed to be emotionless or just? I don't know. Yeah, this episode did absolutely nothing to move the dial for me, except I got a little bit of history of Star Trek, but I still don't think it's as bad as other things that we've
Alternative
seen.
factor.
Oh God, jeez.
You can tell again whether it was budget, whether it was just they had just given up in terms of the writing, but like Scotty's like, Captain, the ship's gonna blow up in 4 hours. Don't ask me to tell you how. I can't really explain it. It's just, I mean, when they don't even bother to give you a quasi scientific kind of extra. And half the episode, the crew on the bridge, McCoy and Uhura, and they're just watching TV. They're just watching the episode, like with edits, cut to the warlord from Earth, the Khan stand-in, he talks, cut back to Kirk, like the camera angles, like what view screen has like in camera editing so that you can, instead of just like a wide shot of these guys like going back again. I mean, I don't want to throw slings and arrows like Spock was hurling spears at there or the paper mache rocks, but like I say, I just feel like we were kind of coming to our own here in season 3. We'd kind of reached an equilibrium where the bad wasn't nearly as bad and the good was pretty good. And then something like this, is it as bad as the one where they didn't finish the sets for the Western episode and the Earp brothers were the villains inexplicably? No. It's probably not as bad as that in the big picture, but it just doesn't leave you wanting to explore, strange new worlds and seek out new life and new civilizations. Like, it just leaves you with kind of a, limping to the finish kind of quality. I hope the last two will reverse this. But yeah, this one should have been, earlier in the season, maybe somehow, just so you could, wash over it and finish on a higher note.
Can I just throw, I gotta throw, real quick, I'm gonna throw something out there for you guys. Do you think with AI now, and just where it's gonna go, do you think people like Shatner and Takai, are they gonna sell their likeness? And are we gonna get original series adventures again? Like, could that be a possibility? Does Nimoy's son sell the rights to Nimoy's image? Could it happen? Could they bring back new episodes?
I'd like to see it. If I'm being honest, as a fan, I would love to see the TOS crew again. I don't think it's necessary. I also don't think that the Nimoy family or the estate will ever let that happen. I think the other actors probably would be like Walter Koenig. He strikes me as a person who'd be like, sure, What do I care? I'm going to be dead. You know.
And could you? I mean, I'm going to look at it from just a slightly different perspective. Wouldn't you sell it to the actor like this? Your legacy is going to be forever. There will never be another Spock. It's always going to be you, Leonard, or like your dad. Right? There'll never be another Kirk. It's always going to be Shatner. I mean, is that a different perspective to sell these guys on it that might not want to be that, because it's going to be, that's it forever, because they're going to modulate their voices, they're going to do everything. I mean, they can do it all.
I think in a way though, they already are the only Kirk and Spock and Scotty, and you can reboot it 100 times, and you know, by the time that there is a new established version of those characters out there that people care about, we're going to be well dead and gone. You know, you're talking 2-3 generations from now, you know, nobody's going to give a crap about TOS probably anymore. I mean, it's going to be a nostalgia piece, but I really like the new Kirk played by James Cameron V. You know, it just, that being said though, one thing that would be cool to see is if AI could somehow rescue this turd of an episode. I think what frustrates me the most is at the end of the episode, all it is they leave and they're like, well, that was interesting. That's it. There is no resolution. They don't like put up a buoy saying don't come near this planet. There's no, you know, bomb them with quantum torpedoes. Like, it's just, well, I got to meet Lincoln. That's it. So without further ado, I go to our Warp Core ratings. Fert Derby, if we could start with you, because I know Lord Uther wants to say something, and I'm gonna give him the midpoint. Fert Derby, take us away.
Yeah, gentlemen. I mean, I don't usually go this low, and it's probably not the lowest I've ever gone. But this is a deuce. This is a 2 for me, just in terms of overall how I felt about it. I had never seen many of these original Trek episodes. I have enjoyed the ride, and this is one that I wasn't clawing at my eyes saying, get me out of here, please, you know, etc. But I wasn't engaged. You know, Jean-Luc Picard would have thrown me in the brig because he would have said, engage. And I would have said, I can't, sir. I quit. Thanks
for stealing the joke.
Okay, there it is. So yes, that's a deuce.
Well, you just talked me into lowering my score. So I was going to go 3. I'm going to go 2.5. So just a little bit above. But yeah, this was a stinker, but not as bad as a few other episodes. Urza.
We're setting a new precedent on the Warp Core 87. I am hitting the eject the Warp Core button on this episode.
Wow.
I can't even give this a Warp Core. I hate this episode. It is terrible. If there is one episode that I think every Star Trek fan should avoid if you've never seen the original series, it's this one. Skip it entirely. There's nothing redeeming here whatsoever. You don't get a good K-Less. You get good K-Less on DS9. You don't get good Vulcan history. You get that in literally anything else. You don't get Khan. You get some Khan knockoff that you would find at Dollar Tree.
Diet
which is
Khan.
Like Millennium Man villain. Fuck that. It's terrible. I cannot give this a Warp Core rating. My dilithium crystals cannot take it anymore. I have given them all she's got, just keeping my eyes open through this episode. It was bad. It was true garbage television. I would have canceled it after this episode. We have 2 more to go. And hopefully there is something yet worthwhile. Because if you back in the day took your dial, switched the TV off, and threw it out in the back pasture, your cornfield that everybody had in the late 60s in most of America, I would totally get it. I would totally understand. You're pulling out every deflector coil from the back of your TV with it still on because you've given up entirely on life after this. Respect. Throw yourself down the well. Wow. You don't need to live anymore after watching this. This episode sucks. I cannot say enough how much I can't stand this episode. It's so bad. all things aside, I will say Nichelle Nichols was very classy in her explanation of why they no longer use that word. So, rest in peace, Nichelle Nichols. You're an icon. You're an inspiration. Gene Roddenberry, you should be ashamed and rolling in your grave that this ever got created in your name. Amen. Until the next we meet our gallant TOS crew, live long and prosper.